Good afternoon. Welcome back to Box to Battlefield. We're going to move forward on our little diorama base today. And one of the things that I did off camera was I painted about 75%, maybe even more percent of our earth all in flat black paint. Now we're going to demonstrate a little bit up here, just doing the same thing. But basically, guys, you saw it in the plaster form, which we worked on our last visit, which was this. And I gave it the old shake and shook off all the excess, which is a must to do because the minute you hit it with your airbrush, if you haven't done the shake test, it blows all over your modeling table, and then you've got to clean up in a situation. So go outside, give it the shake test. And that basically means that when you're adding the plaster and the sand together, you're squeezing it a little bit. Now, sometimes, as you guys know, if you shake it and it ends up like exactly like I have here with two little white spots of plaster, we're going to have to backtrack and with a little bit of white glue and a little bit of extra sand, and I'll demonstrate that right on this sample piece here. We're going to have to add some more sand because we can't have exposed plaster in the middle of our diorama. So let me just troubleshoot or give you guys a situation where a little bit of troubleshooting can be fixed or can fix the problem. So basically what I'm going to use here is there's a product that all of you can find, I think, called Weld Bond. And it's a fast-drying white glue, very strong. And we're using a material here, guys, this little loose sand that doesn't require a lot of strength to hold it down. You can mix it with a little bit of water, economically, maybe 25% water, just to push it a little further. But let's say we have a situation where we give our diorama the shake test outside or over top of a container, to collect the sand. If that happens and too much shakes loose, maybe we didn't press it down into the plaster well enough, a situation like the following can come up where we have little spots or little holes or craters where there's no sand any longer. So all we have to do is, and again, gather these paintbrushes, and we all find them at different stores, or you can find them at garage sales and what have you. There's always a garage sale with 5 or 6 of these hanging around for 50 cents each. So grab these because they're going to, you're not going to use them for anything else but groundwork. So it doesn't really matter the condition they're in. We're going to brush on some white glue with them. So anyway, so they're basically, I take a little bit of water and a little bit of our white glue mix. Spread it over top of the part of the groundwork where where when we shook it, it came loose, just because we didn't fix it well enough earlier, when the plaster was wet. And it can easily happen. I mean, especially if you put on too much sand, it can't get through to the plaster. So anyway, I'm just going to dab a little bit. Take some sand and then just go through the same process. Just squeeze it on and then it's fixed. And give that just a second before I give it the shake test. Let the glue bite into it a little bit. But basically what we're doing is duplicating what we did on our last program, but this time it's held down with white glue versus embedding itself into the plaster. Now, one of the things not to do is to put the sand on first, and then with a squeezy bottle and some white glue and water is to start squeezing it. Squeezing the glue out of our little, like a plant sprayer or the model railroader clubs always have a sprayer that you can spray the cement on over top of the sand. The trouble with that is what happens is the glue sits on the top of the sand, and then you end up painting glue and sand together. This way you're strictly painting sand. When you're painting the the glue, it just never looks right. And half the time it's semi-gloss, and the result is not going to be the same as if you put the glue down first. So go through it's a slower process, I understand that, but the results are much superior. So don't start just putting down your sand and misting on, quick glue like the model railroaders do. They do it through for different reasons, like for putting on their ballast on their train layouts and stuff. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work in this setting. So in 35th scale dioramas. But anyway, let's just see if the glue's. Well, then it probably has. But anyway, I just take a little container like that and just give it the little shake test. And there we are. We've recovered, So let me fill in the patch underneath our King Tiger, and then we'll get spray painting. So I again use Peter Loffer's King Tiger, just because it has all the wheel assembly and the track on, and the one we've been working on isn't at that stage yet. So there's our two little holes. I'm just gonna patch those. Okay, and weld bond, as I said, is like a white glue that's dries a little quicker. It's great, actually. The airplane guys use it for gluing on their canopies because it dries so crystal clear. But anyway, weld bond you can buy at Home Depot and that sort of store. You can get that locally. Now, so there is a few little patches here where once I give it the shake test, it came off. So now we'll do it on our real diorama. A little bit of water. A little bit of glue. And we're going to be using this glue when we start gluing down our vegetation. We're going to use the same product. We're going to use weld bond for that too. And we'll just letting that harden up. Now, I'm not too worried about underneath here because this is underneath the bottom of the tank. So if you are short on sand or anything, make sure you're short on sand in this part of your model and not out into the field itself. If you're, see, but just it's a simple little, but like I say, the King Tiger sits over top of this and it'll never be seen, so I don't mind too much if the center of this is without sand. It's not a concern. Okay, so once we got the sand, once we get the plaster down and dry, and this has all been pushed in as you guys saw in our last video, and then again a few patches, but some dioramas, especially with people who haven't done this a lot, they're quite satisfied with the color of the sand, and they just push the plaster in and they don't paint it, and that's a mistake. Moving forward, you guys will see the result of painting your groundwork. But like I say, especially someone who's building their first diorama, they haven't done it a lot, they get this and it looks great and it's natural and it's 1-to-1 scale sand color and all that sort of stuff. And that's how their diorama sits. Now, as you guys can see, this looks like the moon. There's no texture, there's no layering, there's no anything going on in this little, in this little portion of the base. It's boring, and but once you start adding the Tamiya paints, you can bring it alive. And then towards the end of our session with the diorama, you'll see how I bring out oil paints and oil washes, MIG and AK and that sort of stuff, and it gives it a layering, not unlike the layering that we put on our tank. So my favorite go-to, once we paint it jet black, and I use Tamiya flat black XF #1 and spray the entire diorama as best I can. There's going to be little grooves and little places where you miss, and that's all understandable. It's terrain. So now, as far as the colors to go forward, my favorite is Tamiya XF57 for the European theater of war. But there are some great earth tones in the Tamiya line that you can use. 55 and 72 is popular, especially on a rainy day or a muddy field. You know, I'm just trying to think of a situation. But if you were, say, into the November, December diorama settings, you might want to go to the 72. It's a great color for the damp Battle of the Bulge type of groundwork. And then there's these for the desert, your Desert Storm or your Kuwait diorama, your Bradley Abrams type of settings. You might want to move to these colors in your groundwork. Always keep white handy. But I'm gonna mix up our buff, and then I'm gonna start painting it. And it takes a little while to paint. You have to cover a lot of area here. There's lots of angles and twists all over these little stones here. You know, but you'll see how effective the black is. And this diorama doesn't work if you don't paint it black first. The procedure that I'm showing you here doesn't take long. If you've got a Iwata Revolution or, you know, even a Badger 350 for doing this sort of process, and then moving into your buff color, and you'll see how this diorama is suddenly going to come alive shortly. So let me off camera mix the paints. I'll give you the percentage of thinner versus paint, and that sort of thing, and then we'll get on to painting. So one of the things when we come back is I'm going to show you guys painting this black, which will take us 2 or 3 minutes on camera, and then we'll switch to the buff. So let me load up the brush and we'll be back to you in a second. Okay, so there's other colors you can use. I'm using XF1, but you can use XF69, which is NATO black. Don't use gloss though in this thing. Groundwork, as we all know, is pretty flat stuff. Now I'll tell you and show you guys on our sample piece over there what happens if you don't do the groundwork black first. I mean, this is an important step to any diorama, is create these artificial shadows, but very, very important. So because especially depending on where you display your model, it can just die on the vine, especially if you have fluorescent lights. If you don't paint it black first and create some kind of layering, some kind of shadowing. And as you can see, there's our 3 little puddles that we made out of that styrene last time. And all those have, I'll shut the pump off. So you're going to see these little puddles come to life over the next 2 or 3 episodes. Well, not 3 episodes, certainly 2 episodes. Because groundwork, gentlemen, takes a very short time to do. Once you get the plaster laid and the sand on, which takes, you know, an hour and a half or so, then you paint it black, then you're going to be painting it beige. Groundwork can be done almost in a day, other than drying time of the plaster. Building this type of base is a very short time frame. Don't think that because, you know, we've made 2 or 3 episodes here that the timelines have eaten into your modeling time. This whole process is a very short process. You know, once you get the drying time out of the way. So all I'm going to do now is just tip out the black paint I just put in there, put in my beige, and then I won't paint the whole thing on camera. That would be madness, but you guys would be bored to tears. But what I'll do is I'll paint a section, plant some grass, and we'll even get into painting and planting some grass and putting some of the vegetation together. So here's our field of grass that we're going to use, and it doesn't matter which color that you're going to buy this in, the vegetation, because we're going to paint that green as well. So like I bought the Knock 7101 wild grass, but it wouldn't matter to me if this came in purple or, you know, fluorescent orange. It wouldn't matter one iota because I paint 100% of my groundwork. So don't worry about the color. If you get to your local train store or your hobby shop and they only have Augusta, Georgia green grass and it looks ridiculous on a setting in, you know, the Battle of the Bulge, don't worry about the color, guys. It means nothing because we all have airbrushes. We all know how to handle changing the color of some store product grass. So don't panic. Don't get into your hobby shop and get into a tizzy about color. We've gone over that enough. So let me just clean out the airbrush off camera, and then we'll get to our beige, and then we'll get into the finer points of the groundwork. Thank you. Okay, so now I'll show you how this black works so well. I'll spray this bit of sand that we did here with no black. All right, that's pretty standard stuff. It's just, to me, a number 57 over top of regular plaster. Looks fine, especially if you're gonna do Desert Storm, no problem. But now you'll see how it really comes alive when we do it on here. And like I say, guys, I'm not gonna waste camera time and battery power doing this whole thing. I'll do a lot of this off camera, but let's just go over this sort of 25% right here. And it's very absorbent, guys. It's gonna take a bit of paint. I mean, we're spraying beige over top of black here, so it's gonna take a little bit, but the end result is massive. So, and in a second I'll show you my Stewart diorama where the groundwork is obviously done the same way. But you can see how the stones, the little pebbles and what have you, are coming alive. And that's because around the bottoms of these sphere of the actual sand, the pieces of sand, it's still black underneath. So it's creating this, an individual shadow all by itself. Because I'm spraying it from a certain angle. If I sprayed my airbrush like this, then I'm taking away some of the black just by the tilt of the brush. So I'm not gonna be interested in doing that. But this little, let's zero in on this little stone here. That little stone has got black underneath it and surrounding it. So it pops. You can just see how well it pops. All right, so this little ridge, this little, now I'm just gonna refill my airbrush, but now let's compare notes. It's like night and day, you know, and as we put on a couple of layers on here, this will suddenly become invisible. You won't be trying that at home. So let's just put on our next coat, and I'll mix up some paint off screen. Now, as far as measurements go, I use a Tamiya lacquer, and I use my buff, and in this case, as you guys know, I quite often paint my tanks at 70% thinner, but with groundwork, I put on a little less thinner. I'm probably spraying it maybe 50-50, maybe even a little bit more heavy on the paint, maybe 55% paint. So, but any event, let me load her back up again, and then we'll get to it again. So just hang on it 1 second. Okay, so I've mixed I mixed the same color again, buff with our thinner. But I've also collected my Stewart tank, which has the finished groundwork. And you can see, there's my little stretcher, by the way, buried under there. And underneath the grass is the dividers. But you can see how the groundwork's going to come together here, the same as it is on here. And you know, it's a dry old road. And, you know, we're going to take a couple of coats of paint to create that, but it's not going to be long before our groundwork here is going to look like that. And then I'll show you guys how I poured the puddles and all that sort of stuff. So and this little Stewart sits in my cabinet at home, and it just looks better on its natural ground. So there she is. So let's just keep going here. And like I said, gentlemen, I'm not going to paint this whole thing on camera. I think it's more important to zero in on a certain patch of ground here and do the whole thing. Now, I like on the Stewart base, there's a little ridge here, and the same ridge is developing here, and I will always put a little extra color along that ridge. That's a ridge that'll collect sunlight, and it just looks better, you know, with a little extra paint on it. It just brings out the ridge a little better. It just looks. But anyway, as you guys can see, with 2 or 3 minutes of spraying time, our groundwork is really starting to look like it should. And then once we start putting the vegetation on and all that sort of stuff, she'll really shine. So I'll give this a brief little coat off camera, and then we'll start putting on our vegetation, and then come our next episode we'll be painting it and everything. If I start painting the vegetation tonight, the ground will be in jeopardy, simply because the weld bond won't hold it tight enough, long enough for us to shoot in this episode. So let me just, like I say, cover this a little bit off camera, and then we'll get to the vegetation, and then our following episode we'll just paint the grass blades and what have you. And pretty soon, before you know it, it'll look like the groundwork underneath the Stewart. So hang on 1 second, guys, and I'll be right back with you. Thank you. So I'm just painting away at this ridge here. Like I say, I want to put a little bit of extra light in it. I might even add a little bit of white paint moving forward. And our tank tracks we have, we'll bring those out. So guys, because we're dealing with the plaster here and sand that we've glued down and pushed into the plaster itself is a little bit porous, so it takes a little bit of paint. There's no question, it takes a little bit of time, but the time is so worth it. I mean, if you look at the groundwork underneath the Stewart, again, I built that whole diorama, other than drying time, in a day, but it brought out that Stewart a little bit. And the same thing is going to happen with you guys have been with me for a month building this King Tiger, watching it come together, so we can't skimp on the groundwork at this point. And I've even dug out our figure for us. Here's our little cameraman who's going to be taking a picture of our King Tiger in the end. Bravo 6. And he's a newer figure. He came out in 2018, maybe late 17. and the number is 35115, and he's gonna fit perfect into our little vignette. All right, so one of the things not to do, guys, is to tilt your diorama up like so and then spray underneath this ridge. Just let it happen all naturally, because that is obviously under shadow in real life. So don't spoil that effect. You know, and don't worry that you're gonna have to lay down the beige paint all at once. It takes time. And again, you paint it and then it absorbs in a little bit. Like, this has already changed color since we painted it because it absorbed into the plaster a little bit. So, you know, all of this takes time to go over again. And then I'm gonna have to go over it a third time or a fourth time. But that's just the characteristic of the material that we use. But it's much more natural too. It's much better to do that. And then eventually, because we are dealing with the late war theater of war on the Western Front, you know, I'm going to be probably using a little bit of this color, which is 72, just because of the nature of our diorama. You know, it's probably October, November of 44, so all right, so what we'll do is I'll give this one more spray, guys, and then we'll start planting some grass and then prepare that for our next episode, because we're painting the grass is not, you know, very difficult. We're going to use maybe 3 shades of green, but nevertheless it has to be anchored in pretty good. So off camera I'll carry on painting up the base, and in a few minutes we'll put the grass down. So I will catch up to you guys in a second. Thanks so much. Okay. So guys, here's an interesting little contrast or visual that I need you to look. Look at this groundwork now versus our first pass of the beige paint, our Tamiya 57. So you can see how, guys, it doesn't happen on our first pass. For one, we're using, you know, at least 50% thinner possibly, or at least 40% thinner. So, but you can see how this groundwork is now, where's our little sample? It's like night and day, you know, compared to our little sample that we were using. So, again, we're not painting over top of black. So let's just, now, on the there's little contours here. They're inches in real life, but let's just catch the highs. I was speaking to a friend at dinner the other night, and we were chatting about the YouTube, and I said, well, quite often I get a lot of likes for the groundwork, and I'm surprised. You know, I thought the groundwork was sort of something that everybody did, and everybody you know, didn't need a lesson or two on this. And he simply said, Dave, do you know how many guys produce lousy groundwork? You know, he said, that's why everybody's watching the groundwork and, you know, not too worried about the king tiger. The king tiger they can all achieve, but the groundwork is where they feel that maybe their modeling isn't the same. So they want to bring up their groundwork to the equivalent of the models that they're painting. So I think maybe that is, I never thought of it, but I really appreciate all you guys bearing with me here as I paint this, because okay, so I'm just about finished this area, so we can start laying in the grass now, and I'm going to suddenly cover this now with 50% grass and cover up And don't worry about our puddle, guys. Our puddle will become a puddle. Right now it's just going to catch a extra overspray and what have you, but it'll be isolated and all our little puddles will come alive shortly. So, but now that our groundwork is starting to really take shape, I'm going to start planting the grass, and then on our next episode we'll paint that and put our diorama back together again. Okay guys, so as I've told you, off camera I will paint all the rest of this to equal this here. This is basically finished from, this little quadrant here is finished as far as the painting of the beige. Now there's a few more steps. Obviously there's the layering of different oil paints and what have you, but let's lay in some grass now. Now that laying in the grass is simple, and a lot of guys now go out and they buy static grass machines and everything like that. I just don't find that grass in 35th scale needs to be like that. I don't need a static grass. The machines that raise it up and have it stand on its end. It's not a concern of mine. So all I do is, again, I take my weld bond mixed with water, and I just pick my spots, and I don't go too far out as far as putting this on. I sort of do a little area, say 2 inches square maybe, because the glue will simply dry, and it usually dries glossy, and you don't need that going on. So that's all the shape I take. I take a little pinch of our grass, and just start laying it in. Now, one of the inexpensive ways of making this stand up static grass is simply taking a child's birthday balloon, rubbing it on your hair, which I don't have any of, and creating a static electricity that way, and then putting the balloon down over top of the static grass. And it's always worked in my model railroading days when I had hair. So there's no problem with it working that way, but those days are long gone for me. I think Dave Forrest has the same hairline as I have. So let me just dab out a little bit of this glue. Sorry, Mr. Cameraman, it's just... Here we go. All right, and as you can see, guys, it's gonna look random. And again, I use a little mixture of water as well as the weld bond just for economic reasons. It doesn't take any strength to hold this down, so I don't need full strength weld bond to do this. And you guys, one of the things all of you guys have done is stood in a field of grass. You know how it lies, so you don't have to go to photographic references for doing this. It's all going to come pretty natural to you guys, because we've all been on a hike and we all know what it looks like. But if you live in a country where, you don't have access to the kind of stuff that we're trying to duplicate here, simply go to your National Geographic. They have tons of wildlife photos and all that sort of stuff. It's pretty simple to find the reference on how to lay down this grass. The trouble is our World War II books are all in black and white, and they're all taking pictures of vehicles, and obviously the cameraman isn't the slightest bit interested in the grass patterns of. Now it may look lumpy and clumpy at the moment, guys, but wait till our next episode when we go to paint this. Everything will come together similar to our grass on our. And you can see I've covered up at least 50% of our nice groundwork already. Okay, so one of the areas that you're going to want to make sure that you concentrate on is right around our little puddle here. That's going to generate certainly some vegetation. So with a few little dabs of, and don't forget, the grass is only going to hold where we put the glue. So even though this may look overdone during the filming, once we blow it off, it's only going to stick where I've painted on the glue itself. So don't look at that and say, holy smokes, that looks terrible. Because when I blow it off, it's only going to stick where I've put the glue. So don't worry if your little diorama has covered up your puddle. There's no glue down in there, so it's not going to stick. And then once this is firm and dry, I'm just going to hit it with an airbrush with no paint in it, and it's going to blow off all the excess. So anyway, we've got to get vegetation in and around there, which we've done. And then I'll just sort of pick my way. And one of the places we don't want any vegetation is along the this eroded little stream here. There's never any vegetation growing up in there. For one, it doesn't receive very good sunlight. So as you can see on the Stewart base, there's no grass along this portion of the riverbed, and it's like I say, it lacks sunlight and that sort of thing. So that pretty well covers. And like I say, off camera, guys, I'm gonna paint this whole thing with our Tamiya buff, plant some grass, and then the next time we're together, guys, we'll start painting the grass, which is going to be a very short episode. It's just going to be basically 3 or 4 shades of khaki green, and then we'll put the whole thing together again. And then, like I say, I've always said to you guys, I'm not going to paint the figure on screen, but you get a good idea with the well-painted figure on this box art. That would just slow down the whole process. It takes me about a month to paint figures. Not a month, guys, on and on, but you know, by the time I fill in all the seams and sand out the seam lines and everything, 3 or 4 episodes would slide by. So I'm going to be working on him off camera entirely, and then we'll pull it all back together again momentarily. But anyway, our next episode we'll paint the grass. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you.